Hey everybody, I'm Bryson from Montgomery County Public Libraries. Hi people. First, just a shout out. This is my first KohaCon and it's been a wonderful experience. So props to all the people organizing and doing all the work to make this happen. I appreciate it. Special props to whoever is keeping the schema stuff up to date. Love it. Thank you. Love it. So I found out this morning that apparently my room was next to a haunted room over at the Eldridge. So I was like, oh, local history. So I was like, oh, the air conditioner all last night, it's super loud. But that was not the case. It was a haunted. Okay, so let me go into this and actually let me set a timer because I'm kind of bad with the timing. All right. So yeah, we're going to talk about data and visualizations. Most of the stuff I'm talking about is going to be tool set agnostic, so you can use your choice of tools. Though I'll also talk a little bit about data outside Koha, but primarily the dashboards and things include and rely on Koha stuff. Obviously, this is Koha. All right, let me come in here. Okay, so if you're like me, you like to look ahead. So you can use the cheat code. I'm not going to tell you which one it is to get the presentation and go ahead. I think there's about 60-ish slides. Encourage you to cheat. You have my permission to go ahead. So some of the goals, I want you to leave here with ideas and inspiration to do a few things. And not all of these will be applicable to everybody, but I think there'll at least be some stuff here useful to everybody. We're going to talk about maybe identify some Koha data elements. Is that up on the screen? Let me see. Oh yeah. Okay, then I'll definitely read it. So the colors are a little off, but it says, or it's supposed to say, learn what Koha data elements might be useful in a branch and or system-wide dashboard. So that'd be interesting. And we'll go a little more there. The next slide that you might be able to see, it's provide some ideas and tips on how you can visualize your Koha data or other data. Using these, you can better understand how your customers interact with your library. I got some good stuff in there for you about that. And then also, talk about understanding how a visual analytics tool or platform can help staff and leadership use data to inform decision making. I know this is an increasingly important thing. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then, ideas and tips on capturing data preparation, and in my opinion, the thing you can get the most bang for your buck, communicating with library staff using data. If you can do this, the impact is going to be a lot greater. That said, everybody I talk to, everywhere I go, this is like a really, really, really hard thing to do successfully. All right, so introduction. Yes, this one you can see, it's supposed to be like bright pink and white. So just so you know, I try to do accessibility right. I may have failed a little bit here. Okay, so I'm Raymond Bryson. I come from a web search analytics background, like front end development type stuff. And now I find myself doing all things data, and I really, really, really enjoy it. It's fun and great. But really, the reason I'm doing this is because I kind of consider the big picture, and I'm curious about the customer journey, right? So before they get to the cataloger website, while they're there, after, like what's involved, how can we make it better for the customer? How can we get the cool library stuff that we have, get it to them so they can use it, and then like shout their praises and come back more and more. That's kind of my end game there. And I've worked in academic, federal, and public libraries. I know there's a law library back there. I've worked in law libraries. I worked at NIH. I personally, I like public libraries the best, but all libraries are great. And let's go to the next slide. This is, can you see it? Yes, this sums up my opinion. There's supposed to be little hearts all over the place, which they're kind of washed out. So if it's not obvious, I heart libraries. Okay, so for Montgomery County, Maryland, This is where I work. There's about 1.1 million residents. We have enrolled in our public school system about 166,000 K-12 students. There are more, a couple thousand, 10,000 more in private schools, and I think the total under 18 crowd is about 210,000. So that early literacy stuff we try to focus on too. So we have a lot of people we can reach. An interesting thing is 40% of our homes, there is another language besides English that is spoken at home. So, this gives you a hint about how diverse our area is and some things we're working with. 59% of our population, age 25 or over, has a bachelor's degree or higher. And we are just outside Washington, DC, and hopefully, yes. Okay, so this is washed out, but we are right outside DC. So DC is essentially right there, which you can't see on this screen. And then in the yellow up here, this is our county when you zoom in, and all those little pink or purplish dots, I guess, those are our actual libraries. So this is just for context, because I think context is important, especially if you're going to tell stories with your data. So we have 21 libraries. We're open 7 days a week as of late February, early March. Total items in our collection coming in about 1.9 million, and holdings about 1.4, and we have 350 staff members. And one key thing to note about our staff members as I go on is we have arranged so that everybody has access to our visual analytics tool, which we use Tableau. They all have a view license. So this is part of building a culture of data and increasing data literacy. All right, so can you see this? Okay, this one shows up. The most important slide, obviously. So we left something that I'm not going to mention and came over to Koha, and we have our Aspen layer on top of that. And we came over 10/4/2021, and as far as I can tell, it's been the best decision we've made in a long time. Okay, so I think there's context. So our library customers, because I know we're a bigger library, we have, as of the last fiscal year, we have about 511,000 registered borrowers, and we have about 184,000 active users. And for total circ, it's about 5.2 million, about 2.2 million overdrive and Hoopla checkouts. And then if you throw in everything like in-house use, all other electronic resource use, it comes in about 11.6 million. So this is what we're working with as we go forward. Age distribution, this is a cautionary tale also in making sure your data comes in okay. Here's the curve here. Almost, it's interesting. I like this chart, by the way, because you can see when people decide to go off to college or leave home, there's that dip, and then it climbs back up when everybody comes back and has kids and wants to go to story time. That big spike, cautionary tale, when we switched over to a system, before you didn't need date of birth, and then somebody decided to give everybody the same date of birth. So we do not have an outsized number of 47-year-olds crap in, crap out. So if you can do the whole validation or limit what can go in what fields, you do not need to. Let me put it to you this way: there are people who are over 1,000 years old. They've lived a long time. They love their libraries. That's also very, very wrong. That should not be allowed. Okay, and then here is, it comes out okay, but this is a density map. So you just plot all our registered borrowers on here, and you can see the hot spots. It's think of it as similar to a weather map. The closer to the city, the denser, the more users there are, and then our corridor out of the city, it's kind of a line you see there. This is where we have a lot of users. Okay, so what we're building is basically, to sum it up, if you just want to tune out for 5 minutes, I can tell you right now, build more interactive, less static. We want to move away from Excel sheets. We want to move away from PDF documents. We want to move away from static charts, things like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I still use all these things. It's just we find that when people can interact and play with the thing, you guys strike me as a bunch of people who like to experiment and play with things. So this would be right up your alley. we find that people are engaged more with using data to inform their decisions or find holes or places for improvement. So more interactive, less static. Okay, this may, let me see if it washed out. Okay, yeah, it's kind of hard to see. If you go online, if you have a computer, mcpl.link/pres, the colors might be a little better here. So this is an example of a system dashboard and overview. So all our staff have access to this. We also do one, we have a system-wide one that aggregates at the system level, and we have a branch version of this where people click and choose their branch, because everybody can get I'm not saying it's a competition, but branches can be competitive, and they want their branch to be the best, do the best, and they want you to know. So branch dashboard, everything you see on here, again, to promote like a culture of data, everything here is clickable. You can hover over it, you'll see things. Really important for people is, it's kind of hard to see up here, but any of the dates you see up there, like in the top left, the checkouts and renewals, you're seeing the weekly, you're seeing this across the weeks, but staff can, hover over, click plus or minus, and they could say, I want to see it like monthly. Maybe they're a leader and they're like, I just need to see it quarterly or fiscal year wise. You can do that. Anybody can do that across everything on here. So for Koha, it's the checkouts and renewals, the self-checkout percentage, and unique active users, and we'll go into that a little more later. Check time. Okay. And then we pull in other things too. So programming, phone calls. When the library was closed because Koha, we did what we called holds to go, which is basically like curbside delivery. So we had a sheet, like one of the black buttons up there would be holds to go. It would be there so people could see, because again, libraries wanted they wanted to know how they were doing, but they also wanted everybody else to know how they were doing in comparison to each other. So a little friendly competition. So I'm just going to click through these, try to save some time for questions. If you click any, can you see that? Yeah. So if you were to click any of these black buttons, it would take you there. Here's our checkout page. This is just Koha. Standard stuff, also very popular amongst staff, the checkouts. Example why this is kind of cool, the date slider, which is on wherever we can put it or wherever I can put it, I put it there because staff like to, for example, do a thing like, oh, we did this new display, or we moved our checkout, self-checkouts in this location. We did it during this time frame. So then they would, move the slider to whatever time frame they're looking at, before or after, and then they would try to see, okay, did that have an impact? Did we see a change? Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, sometimes it's more complicated than that, and we'll talk about that. So that's just checkouts. We have foot traffic. Here, people love to compare again across branches. This is why there's a table there. I'm not a fan of the table, but I like compromising if it gets things done. There's the day of the week is an issue. For people who are questioning sort of like, well, should we be open this day of the week or that day of the week? The day of the week kind of breakdowns are very, 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 very useful, and they can encourage discussion or back up certain points or decisions. So just throwing that out there. Here we have the active users, and we'll go into more detail about this later. It's one of my favorites. And here we're plotting, standard area charts, bar graphs, got the slider. We can filter by card type, that sort of thing. But we have this zip code distribution, and it's plotted. This darker area here makes sense if you know the area. But it's useful, and we'll go into more detail about that. And here's just programming. This is our second most popular thing. Here we have a heat map, the times of programs. This is a very, 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 very common question. It's like, what time is the best time to do a thing? And so you can look at the historical information and see, or if you're trying to manage multiple story times across all 21 branches or regional areas, you might actually want to look and see where, are all branches hosting story time at 10 o'clock at the same time across the entire county? Maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe you want to, host them at different hours, different locations. Lots of filtering here. And finally, the newest addition is our phone logs. This is all mostly automated. Ingestion, collection, everything here is automated. So I'd like to get everything automated, or as much as automation as possible. After verifying that it's valid and good to go. So you can, like, if you were to glance at this, you'd see this huge spike and you'd be like, what happened in January? Like, that would be my first question. Well, it turns out we decided to give out COVID kits, and the libraries were basically rushed. I mean, calls, foot traffic, checkouts too, to some extent. So we have a lot of data to back that up. And just to note, these are high level, so you should be able to glance quickly, not be like, burdened with trying to figure things out. You should be able to glance and understand, right? But for all of these things, I have much more complex and deeper, I call them projects, you call them workbooks, worksheets, that allow our staff to really, really dig down and deep and get some insights. But for most people, that's too much. So my really strong recommendation is, if possible, keep it as simple as you can, at least when you first throw this in front of people's eyeballs. Otherwise, you're going to scare them off. All right, so I had mentioned that one of the things that I think is really important, I mean, we just had a session about train the trainers, right? And like communicating and throwing things out there. So communicating and sharing data is super, super important. And we've been like slowly trying to improve this and work on it. And no matter what tool set you use, I think some of these tips might be applicable to y'all. And we found that this has been helpful and it works for us. So again, can't read this, but what it does say is encourage a culture of data and data literacy. So this is kind of the end game here. All right, you can see my favorite game. So Civilization 6 is my favorite game. Anybody out there play that? Anybody? Yes, my people. Okay, I'm not going to tell you how many hours I've played this. So everything I'm building, we're building it to last, not like forever, not like the Great Pyramids, right? But in the sense that staff can interact and play with it and not worry about breaking a thing. So every single time I have a discussion, or a training, or like a presentation, or a one-on-one, whatever it is, I make it very clear and upfront, you cannot break anything. So please explore and experiment. And for the people who are more geeky and that's like kind of like breaking things, I taunt them. I'm like, go ahead, try to break it. Bring your A game. Just come on, let's do it. And every now and then somebody breaks something, which is great. Well, for me, it's great. So for most people, just reiterate that you can't break it. And at a bare minimum, show your staff how to reset the view, whether it's like refresh the browser, or if there's a button to go back to the original view. Make sure you show that to them. To keep with our gaming stuff here, this is my favorite photo I ever took. Encourage questions. This has multiple benefits to the data team, to the culture, to the organization. But by encouraging questions and feedback and ideas for improvement, you're essentially starting a conversation, right? And kind of sharing information. Really important, like you need to do this across all staff levels, like from the director or the board or whatever it is, all the way down to the person who this is their first job ever. Like everybody has valid opinions, and some people have like great ideas that just pop up. And I try to be as transparent and as inclusive as possible across all levels. And really what this does is people will ask questions, and in my experience, there's a good chance that you've already answered the question. You have the stuff. They just don't necessarily know that it's there or how to get there. So once you show them where and how to, to get to it, they become self-sufficient. And then it's sort of like this interesting like feedback loop where like they get it and then they tell other people about it. And then it just more and more people get sucked up into it. And there's ultimately less work for you, but the impact of your data and your insights grow across the organization. I have a little thing about proactive and reactive, but that's just saying like, if you have a strategic plan or initiative and you know that this is on the agenda in the near future, go ahead and start building a thing to address this and make sure your data set can, or you have one, or you need to expand it or alter it, make sure your data set can address these particular questions. I try not to be reactive, but when the director needs a thing in a day, I'm going to react. Okay, so share often and widely. All y'all will have different ways of getting out information to your staff. We use news posts, which are kind of like blog posts. And an example here that it's kind of washed out on the screen up there, but if you're following along, we shared a couple things, like unique active users mapped by zip code pre-COVID versus COVID is like by far the most popular thing. So staff eat that up. They take these images and then they go off to other ALA or other conferences and use it. And it's beneficial to them, it's beneficial to us, and everybody has a better understanding. So news post, great. I really like that idea. It works for us. We have a Teams channel. You guys might have Slack or some other tool. So this is sort of like a real-time communication. It's focused on data and it's totally open to all staff. Again, that whole idea of being as transparent, as inclusive as possible, strongly encourage it. You might find that somebody will pop in and answer the question before you even get around to it because people get it and they understand it. Or you may have to redirect the conversation ever so politely in a direction that is beneficial. Either way, people are talking about the data and using it. A big one is you grow. There are tools that will help you do this, but honestly, like at our stage and in many stages for many people, a simple like web page would work. So we define and document our data. So we have active users. We've been doing this for a while, and we kind of give a definition so there's no confusion. So we know that staff aren't, they say, oh, we have X active users, and they don't go off and say, yeah, for the last 3 years. No, that's not how it works. We do it yearly. But we have a definition there for them to reference. I put in the data sources, the granularity, like how often we pull the data, and a refresh target, which is essentially how often they can be sure that the data is updated and refreshed. And this is important if you don't directly connect to a database, or if you can't, or if you have multiple data sets outside of Koha, you're going to need to, people are going to need to know when things are like up to date. Okay. Oh, there was a little, let me see if I can go back. Okay. Well, I'll go back. There's basically, we make sure there's a question mark on all the dashboards, and that question mark, people can click that and it will take them to the data documentation page, right? So people, it's like a help button and it takes them directly to the performance measure. This is useful. It's like kind of stops a lot of random emails or conversations before they become a thing. And again, it's transparent and everybody can get to it. So let me check the time. Okay, so really, I'm big on this like data literacy, data culture thing. You could have the best, well curated. You could have all your data could be perfect, like no 1,000-year-old zombies. Good luck if you have that. You could have the perfect data sets, and you could have the perfect visualizations. But if your people don't know how to like use them or why they should use them, it's just a waste of time and resources. So this is kind of what this is supposed to, the story I'm trying to tell here. All right, so unique active users, and there's that bright pink again. So just as a reminder, here is just from the system dashboard. And this is a thing you could build with a real simple report pulled from Koha. And again, our definition here, an active user is basically somebody who's done something with their library card in the last year. I know other places have like a 3-year range or 2-year, or they may actually not include all the category codes or like library card types that we include, but this is our specific definition and it has been used since, well, I think it's the next slide. Yes, it's been used since 8/27/2019. This is one of the things that we've been able to successfully bridge from the ILS that I will not name to Koha. The data has lined up and it has worked. So what's happening here is we run a report, we capture this information daily, and our current data set is about 16.5 million rows. That may be a lot or a little depending on where you're coming from, but it seems like a lot, but when you plot it, it's not as much as you think, because for example, somebody could come every day for a whole year, you know, and times 500,000, you suddenly have a lot of rows of data. Okay. So here's this, I'm calling it the one simple Koha report. I mean, it's really coming from the borrower's table. Point out here that we use Aspen, so we can use last seen to do things. But really the most important thing is the last seen, the borrow number, and the zip code. And what's interesting about this is we can't really connect to a database here because we need to grab the last seen every day because that gets updated every day. So we have to essentially take a snapshot every day. So I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure there are other things where you would want to do something similar where you have to take a snapshot every day so that you can track it over time. And I'll go, I have some other stuff, some other slides that talks about this too. But really run it daily. And then we just count distinct, you know, look for the unique borrow numbers for any given time period. And that gives us like our total unique active users within that time frame. So if you look at a week, if you have a borrower who does something on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they've been 5 times in the week, that counts as 1 visit. If you have a borrower who only comes once during that same time frame, that's a unique visit. So you just kind of total those up. And then once you have that, you can start doing things. So here is just a super simple, like we're plotting it by zip code on a map, right? Depending on your tool, you may or may not be able to do this. It may look slightly different, but really the zip code is kind of like the highest level of, I would call it like geographic granularity that you might want to focus on. And, you know, this is cool and all, right? But what's really important is if you're able to tell a story, right? So, and put this information in context. So let me see if this shows up here. Okay, so what you're looking at here is that same, you know, we're mapping unique active users by zip code, but we're doing kind of like a snap. We're looking at it for different like date ranges. So on the top left, it's pre-COVID. The green stuff is where, you know, we have a lot of active users. Again, for us, this makes sense. But then COVID hit and we entered the medieval period. It was nothing but horrible things. You can immediately see, it's kind of hard to see here, but you can immediately see there's no green because there's supposed to be green there. But again, there's no green. It was like radio silence, nothing was happening. Then we enter what in the bottom left quadrant, we enter what I'm calling the Enlightenment. And this is where we figured out how to do curbside delivery or holds to go. And now you can start to see our active users pop back up. This was interesting for us to see who was the first to really engage with holds to go and curbside delivery. It was not, well, I won't go into it, but yes, this is where it's useful to have on a map to see where people engage in relationship to like the story, the context. Like the people who engage first are not the people we thought would necessarily engage first. And then the bottom right quadrant is just looking at up to that point, the COVID period. So you could do this too. You may have a different story. Maybe it's you know, before fines, then early stages of fine free, middle stages, and then, you know, late stages. You can frame it however you want. This has been highly effective in telling a story and getting you know, leadership and, you know, the county council, people like that to understand what's going on. So another thing you might want to do is blocked users, for example. Are your blocked users, is it congregate? Are your blocked users in a place where you know low income and poverty is an issue? Well, you know, maybe you want to do something about it. And then you can show using some sequence like this, the impact of your changes. So just something to consider here. All right. Okay, so let me check here. All right. Well, you can see it's supposed to be blue and red. So maybe zip code is, you know, not as granular as you want to go. So we have these things called equity focus areas, and these are census tracts. We've identified 56 of them. A bunch of geeks got together and used like demographic data and plotted and say, hey, look, these are these are places within our county where lower income people of color who, may not necessarily speak English very well, right? These are areas we want to target with outreach and efforts. So maybe you want to plot your active user or other information on top of this kind of thing, which is a good idea. So the next one, we're just showing like our libraries on top of it. And I promise this is all related. We're plotting our libraries on top of it. So just alone, you can see which libraries may or may not, want to work on this or focus on these kind of issues. Like the one in the top right, it's, up county. It's not near any equity focus area. So you might not want to like have a specific, your resources dedicated to equity focus area issues at that particular library. But let's say let me see if this shows up. Okay, yeah, let's say you want to look at, pull your active user and link, the day people registered for a library card, right? You want to kind of look at it that way. So the bottom map is showing for a 10-day period, kind of like where people are. It's a heat map. The red, orange, that's the more people. The green is less. So this is interesting. But then if you say, okay, well, let me link like date registered and then compare it to last seen. So for like a 10-day period here in the top right, you're seeing a bunch of blue and green dots. And this is, by the way, all overlaid on the equity focus area. You can't see that because I blew up the dots just because I don't want people to like, know our points here, kind of maintain some privacy. I would never look at it like that. I would make it smaller. But for sharing widely, this is what we're going with. So the blue dots represent people who registered for a library card within that 10-day range, but have yet to actually come back and do a thing with their library card, right? And the green dot means that they have done something in 2022. And we have it set up that you can pick and choose, you can change when they got their library card. If you look at the whole scope of thing, all 511,000, we see some weird stuff, like people who haven't used the library since like 2012 somehow, but they're still in our system, which makes no sense whatsoever. Opportunities for data cleanup, yay. Okay, so this is all cool. This may be useful to tell a story, but there's more. Right? So here we have our date registered, our last seen, but what if we looked at it by card type? So on the left, it's kind of hard to see. On the left, those are digital cards. On the right, those are regular library cards. So you can see just by looking at the percentages there that 80% of the people who register for a digital card within that 10-day frame have yet to come back and do a thing in our library. Wonder what's going on there, right? But compared to regular cards, it's closer to half and half. So this to me is more reasonable. But again, it still begs the question, like, what's going on? The thing on the right is just the absolute numbers. So our digital cards, a little more than double our regular cards for this time period. Excuse me. Again, everything here you all could technically easily do too. But again, if you put it in context and you tell a story, this is kind of like, well, what's going on, right? But I happen to know something. I happen to know that within this time frame, the county was basically, they have a program called Computer for You. And this program is where we're handing out 50,000 computers to low-income people, people of poverty, people who basically don't have computers at home, which, as you all know, like this whole digital divide, this like you need the technology in order to access all the library school resources. And some of these digital resources are not the best on a phone. So again, computers can be highly useful for that and other reasons. So what's interesting here is that in order to get a free computer, you have to actually register for a library card if you don't have one. So if you see that huge spike of green, right, those are people who are either registering a couple days before or the day of basically the release of the computers. And they do them in kind of like bundles. So you have to have a card in order to get it. So this begs a question like, well, you got a card, you got a computer, and we haven't seen you. 80% of you disappeared. What's going on? So there's room for improvement, communication. Maybe you have a different onboarding process. There's a lot of opportunities to explore there. And theoretically, if we kind of look further out and we change our process, we would be able to show, oh, well, when we initially launched, this is what was happening. But then we changed the process and we worked more closely with somebody. And now we can see that like maybe 60% of people are now coming back to the library and doing things. So it's an example of a useful thing here. All right. Another interesting thing is, does this show up? Yes. Okay, so this is just basically looking at last seen data. And I wanted to know, well, back up a second. Because you have millions of rows of data, so you're taking daily snapshots, you will know when somebody comes and then the next time they come. So in your tool, you can simply create a calculated field and say, okay, look, what's the difference between the time they were first seen and the time they were seen the second time? Or maybe you care about the first time and the 10th time. You can choose these sorts of things. It's up to you, right? But then you kind of map it this way and you can see, for us, we were looking at months to repeat visit, how long it takes a person to come back for a repeat visit, to come in through Aspen and kind of interact with our content. It doesn't tell us the specifics, but again, we just really want to know, were they coming back to us to do a thing? We can change this to quarterly. Yearly wouldn't make sense because we're still kind of newbies there. Quarterly, we've got a little, but monthly seems to be the sweet spot. This is highly useful. I would, the lighter blue, if you look over here, it looks better, the lighter blue stuff here. If you look at the lighter blue, I would say like, okay, well, look, if they haven't been back by month 3, then we need to get our marketing and outreach team. They need to step up the game and like reach out and do a thing, because we're just going to let these people lapse and they probably won't come back for who knows how long. Okay, so let me check time. All right. So collecting data, questions to ask. These are things that I kind of generally ask about everything, but I'll just apply to the active user stuff. One, does it address a problem or need? There's like an infinite amount of data out there. Unfortunately, there's only like one of me or maybe like a handful of people doing this. So in order to prioritize, it's good to know, like, does the stuff, the data set, or will this actually, solve a problem? Yes, in our case, because we had no idea who was, we had registered borrowers, but we didn't know like who was actually coming to do a thing in the library. Even at this high level, we had no clue. And now we know, or we have a much better idea. When to collect, this comes down to like, I guess the specifics of like the data models, but really for us, active user, it had to be daily because the stuff can get overwritten daily. So we want to grab it daily. I don't think we need daily for a lot of things. We can collect, well, I'll stop there. And again, another big one was like how much effort to expend. Is it a manual or automated process? I can tell you right now, we have a cron job set up. It sends this report to an email, and then something sucks up all that stuff and basically adds it to like our data repository. And then that gets all like unioned and linked together to build the data set. I can guarantee you this report runs at like, right after midnight for the previous day. I can guarantee you that I would not get up at midnight to collect active user information. I'm not that dedicated. I love libraries, but I'm not getting up at midnight. So the automation here is crucial, or at least that component of automation is crucial. On the flip side, if I had to manually run this report in the morning when I come into work, we would lose significant data, because it turns out, surprise, surprise, there's a lot of like night owls and people who interact with the library between the hours of midnight and like 8, 9 a.m. It's actually kind of surprisingly significant, or maybe not, I don't know. So, the other thing is when you want to refresh your visualizations and reports, this largely depends on when you ask staff, like what's useful to you. And here's that communication thing. You got to be like, what's good for y'all? We can make it happen. And then, of course, I have this at the end. Do you plan on linking this to other internal or external data sets? I would like encourage y'all to like consider like a couple steps ahead is everybody becomes more data proficient and data literacy expands. Like people will start to ask questions like, well, can you link our checkouts to the number of students enrolled in farm programs in our county? I'm like, yes, that's possible, kinda, you know, but it's, yes, we'll look into it. But these are the kinds of questions that I'm not knocking them. They're good questions, right? But you know, it's just there's a lot more stuff involved. All right. Oh, tip. So I inherited some interesting data, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't think there was like there was no will or plan or data estate plan or whatever. It just kind of like, here you go, enjoy it. But essentially, one tip I found is like to establish and use a numerical library code, because if you have libraries like us, since I've been there for 3 years, we've had 2 libraries change their name, like officially change their name. So, you know, that's kind of a pain. I know in Koha that you know, yeah, the code, like changing the code is a thing that can be a lot of work to clean up, especially if you have a lot of data that use the previous code. And that's just in Koha. So if you have multiple systems like Koha, we have our reservation stuff, we have our program stuff, we have other like just Excel sheets, all kinds of things. And everybody has a great way to refer to their library. It's good to standardize it. So numbers, it's hard to mess up numbers. I encourage establishing a numerical library code. And then finally, and this is maybe more for me or people who use tools like me, but I really would like encourage you to consider prepending like a year, month, day if it's a flat file that you pull down, because when you like link it all together, you know, in your union and you pull it all together, you have this massive 16.5 million row data set. And then suddenly you find problems and you're like, where the heck did this come from? Well, if you have the file name in there and it has a year, month, day, it can help you investigate and kind of troubleshoot. So I found this has saved me so much time. Do I have time? Yes. All right. So other cool things if time permits. All right. So, okay. Does it show up here? Yeah, kind of. Okay. I'll read it. So here we're just looking at staff and self-checkout transactions at these 3 libraries on a specific day. So one of the things is, you know, we opened up on Sundays, and we want to monitor and understand, like, you know, what's going on with Sundays. Are people coming to use the library on Sundays? Like intuitively, some people will be like, yeah, it's the weekend. People work during the week. Of course they're going to come. And then on the other hand, other people who work in the library, like, we don't see anybody come in on the weekends. So, you know, it's just, here's where data can kind of help clarify some things. So this particular chart is looking at, you know, the trends. So that the dotted line is the trend line for each library, these 3 libraries on a Sunday since we started Sunday hours. So here it's saying for staff and self-checkouts that, you know, the trend is it's increasing, maybe not at a super like exponential rate, but it is increasing. And it makes sense. Customers, you know, they are using the library on Sundays. The actual, this is like an export, but the actual dashboard or project itself, you can filter by day of week, branch, interface. You can combine the day of the week. Like, let's say you wanted to compare weekends to weekdays, or if you had like, maybe you have weird hours on Monday, Wednesday, Friday across your system. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, you could compare hours that way. So these are things you can do, and I find them, or we find them, very useful. So maybe day of week is a little too, the bucket's too big, I guess. Maybe you care about transactions per hour open. So you could do this. The caveat here is that you need to have some way of knowing your hours open, right, for each branch. Or if it's a system, maybe you could estimate if your system has the same hours. But we do track hours open. like our managers will put in hours open. And this is useful because sometimes, it snows where I'm from. So we close down, or it gets super hot and the air conditioner doesn't work, we close down. So we do that. Anyway, you can filter transactions by day of week, branch, or interface. And what's cool here is, you can see that here, staff transactions. So here's staff, they're actually checking stuff out on Saturdays. This is their busiest day, right? And then, in the week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, maybe Friday, those are their other busy days. But you get a completely different story when you look at customers who just bypass staff and say, you know what, I can use the self-checkout machine. In fact, I'm going to use it because I got a kid who's ready to go home and I'm stressed out. So here's a different picture. Does it show up? Yeah. So here you're seeing Saturday is still by far the most popular day across our system. But then Sundays clock in is number 2, followed by Friday. So you get a completely different perspective. So, this might be important for staffing, things like that. Then you can combine them. Let me try to combine them. There we go. So you can combine them. So then you can see it in context. Again, Saturdays are rocking it, followed by Sundays and then Fridays. So this is useful. We can change the date range if we want to. You can look at a specific week or not. It's up to you. And you can look at your specific branches if you want to, or combinations of branches if you wanted to look at like regional areas. This is all useful stuff. And then finally, we have self-checkout percentage as a system. This is something we're trying to encourage self-checkout. And you can see kind of when we migrated to Koha that, staff was a lot more involved. It was all new to people, staff and customers. So there's a lot more staff interaction. But as people became more accustomed to it and staff became better at communicating about Koha, we see our self-checkout percentage rise. And this is useful for us, which is why it's on a branch dashboard. And just to go over my current toolbox. And again, this stuff should be everything I talked about is mostly tool set agnostic. Like you can choose your tool. I know somebody had asked a question earlier in the week about Power BI. Like you could probably do all this in Power BI if you want to pay for the licenses, things like that. So here's just the things that I'm using, Tableau Prep, ArcGIS, Policy Map, courtesy of our state grant, good old Excel to quickly view things, Google Sheets, obviously Koha reports, cron jobs. We use ESB for some things. We're in a unique position, our relationship with our IT department, but they do have an ESB we could use to link and connect data and pull it out and store it and drop it in interesting places. And then we use Microsoft Teams and SharePoint because our county is a Microsoft kind of county, for better or worse. And this is the slide that actually works. Okay. That is all, folks. All right. It looks like okay. I just want to say I definitely went under my time, which is good. So, okay. Oh, I see the chat. Well, I'll hold it.
All right, we're going to answer some questions here. I just have the Zoom, so if George, can you pull up or Jason, one of you pull up the YouTube and see if there are any questions on there. Let me get to the right place here. So someone was asking, where'd you go? Not easy to navigate with a mic in my hand. It's a little better. Someone was asking, can we integrate OneSearch with Koha and Google Voice Assistant to Koha OPAC?
I have no idea. I will pass that to somebody who's aware of that, maybe Bywater people. I don't know.
Can we integrate OneSearch with Koha and Google Voice Assistant to Koha OPAC? That's okay. Yeah, you might need to write us and clarify on that question. They also asked which is best open source web scale discovery that is suitable for Koha.
I'm gonna pass that.
Okay. Do you factor in the zip +4 or truncate it to only the zip?
No, well, we're just using 5 digits. Yeah, yeah, we like even in the past, we've pretty much lopped off anything past 5. So for our purposes, that works for zip code. If we needed, let's say, higher precision, we have other ways besides zip code to get that information.
And then there was a comment, this year, month, date is the best in that order. Lots of applauses. Someone said that was great, thank you. And more applauses and thanks, team. Any comments on YouTube or questions? Second.
There's a comment here from Dwight. So his first question is the digital card an app? It's just, you're just using it's just the borrower category in Koha that's used for the self-registration, right? Or probably. Yeah, it's just a type of library card they use at his library. And then the next question is the digital card just for e-Reeses or is it for everything? So if they have a digital library card, they can place items on request. And then when they come to the library, they need to change their card up from a digital resources card to a regular library card. And Dwight also says that the low income area map was very interesting. That was part of policy map, right? Yeah, here, hold on.
So that there may be a link I provided. I can get the link, but essentially what happened was as part of our county, we have like some planning people, and they went and grabbed a whole bunch of census and ACS stuff. They pulled all that stuff together, and then they kind of had their own sort of formula, I guess you could say, and they ranked certain elements, and then they said, okay, of all this, because they ranked all the census tracts, right? They said of those, the ones that scored within this range, we're considering these equity focus areas. So maybe policy map has something like that, which would have probably saved them a lot of time. But that's where I got the information from our county planning people.
The policy map was kind of a question for me, not from Dwight, because I use policy map for some of our libraries. And it does have similar data, but it sounds like what you guys are using is really kind of bespoke for your library, for your area. And then there's one other question here. SFPL, I don't know who that is, but they say if libraries do not currently do much with data visualization, where would you recommend that they start?
Maybe like many people in here, I'm a big fan of just picking a tool and experimenting just to go with it. But if we, so in Maryland, this all kind of started because we received a grant for Tableau, right? So we sort of had our tool set up, and we had a community of people who'd been using Tableau for at least a couple years. So if you can find a community in your region, state, even county that's where I would start, because especially for libraries, because libraries have very, kind of unique questions that maybe the private sector might not care about or have. I would start there. And then of course I would pick a tool that has a really good community and documentation, and start experimenting with some data sets. Like, just go to town, right? Ask your leadership or whoever and say, what questions do we want to answer the most, and pick one or two, and then just see what you can do.
Over here.
With your recent addition of Sundays and your hourly chart you had there, where do you see the checkouts being most prevalent on Sundays? Is it the last hour? Is it the first hour? How do you see that mapping out for you?
I have done this, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. I will say that I feel like the lunchtime hours are like kind of where it dips. There's like a mad rush and then a spike before it closes. This is what I recall. I've done like hundreds of these things and they all kind of blur together. But yeah, but that's a good idea for, we were looking daily, right? But it's totally maybe sensible also to do like sort of like an hourly type thing. The way we did with like phone calls, for example, or the programming where, each hour, like you use a heat map, the redder it is, that's the more stuff that's happening. Totally possible to do with Circ because basically the time date stamp, we could do that. So maybe I should. Thanks.
Quick question. So you had mentioned that there was programming data. Do you know how the individual libraries report that to you? Is it just like an Excel sheet that has that information, or do they like has it in Koha somewhere or something along those lines?
Good old programming. I feel like every library has this problem. So we use Communico. And before that, we used Evanced, right? But with Communico, here's what really happens. The libraries will create the program. We have certain requirements for audience tags, like primary audience tags, event type, all that kind of stuff, right? And then what's supposed to happen is immediately after the event, they drop in the attendance. And we have documentation and saying this is what you're supposed to do, and for the most part that's what happens. But with new people, sometimes we get bad data, and we kind of have to remind people often. But they put this in, and then at the end of the month, this is where that refresh cycle comes into play. What happens is the managers or a supervisor is supposed to verify that all the stuff's in there. And then after I get, green light, I say, okay, I'm going to pull the entire month's worth of stuff down. And I pull like literally everything down. Like, I think it's like the AA. So it goes through the alphabet once. It doesn't quite go through twice. So I think there may be like, in the 40s, some 40 some odd fields. So we pull all that down. And then from there, I clean up and do all kinds of magical stuff. And report back out. So that's kind of our process. I do know that other libraries use Google Sheets, and that's been successful and maybe even easier, especially since you're using, I think, Metabase, right? So you might be able to connect to Sheets a lot easier. We may be able to, if you use Communico, I know people have used their API to drop that information into, say, Orange Boy or some other place. But for us, it's just the manual pool is kind of the easiest thing, especially considering the amount of questionable data that I keep seeing.
I wanted to ask about, you mentioned data literacy. What kinds of things do you teach your staff about, how to interpret the data and how to make sense of it? Because, one of the things that I've experienced a lot is like libraries, you mentioned being open on Sunday. And I've experienced libraries that have had a change in hours, and then like 3 weeks later, they look at the data and they say, well, nobody's coming on Sunday. We need to just, the hell with that. We need to close on Sunday again. And I always tell them, it's going to take at least 2 years before we have any good data. So I'm wondering how you address those kinds of issues with your data literacy training there.
Are you sure you don't work in Montgomery County Public Libraries? I've heard this question before. It's come up multiple times. We have like an AMA, ask me anything with leadership. And this exact question has come up multiple times since we opened on Sundays. So one thing two things. Data literacy, there's like the technical component, right? So do you know how to work whatever tool you're using? Like, that's just like, okay. But then there's the bigger picture of like, can you look at the data or look at the data in context of a question, right? So for the foot traffic question or the Sunday hours question, I give you an example. Some people would look at foot traffic and only foot traffic. So here we have to say, well, that tells you a story, but you should also maybe consider transactions, where they're programming, like the staffing on that particular day, right? It may feel like nobody's there, but you may have more people around, or vice versa. So one step is just to like get people into really looking at the full picture and not just cherry picking the data that proves what they're looking at. Like, ideally, the data is there for you to disprove the thing that you're trying to say. Like, it sounds weird, but really, I want the data to disprove what my theory or my intuition about this. So I encourage people, like, use it to sort of not prove what you're saying, but to disprove, find ways to disprove what you're saying. So
I think too, I'll add to that is just when we changed hours, it's important to note whether or not, did you do a soft opening or did you get the word out or something like that? So
I was just mostly wondering about that part of data literacy, about what to do with the data now that you've got it, rather than how do you address those issues, but how do you address training people on how to interpret the data? That was really more what I was going at. And the Sunday thing was just an example that I've experienced. I've experienced a lot.
One thing that we are getting ready to do and prioritize is like this concept of onboarding. Up until recently, most of this didn't exist in our library, and it might not exist in most libraries, but we're going to start working on building an onboarding process to work on that, like data literacy, and also like the technical side, like, here's the basics of what you need to do, sort of more formalize that and get it up in people's faces. Because really, I feel like staff are doing more with less time, kind of. So I don't want to overburden them, but definitely want to give them, a way to ramp up their understanding of data and use of it. So I don't know exactly what that onboarding process will look like, but if anybody has ideas, I'm more than happy to hear them.
Okay, one more question.
So mine is kind of similar to George's, but it's more, how do you use that data to kind of look at maybe those hours that are being, and days that are being seen more, as well as like when people are coming to programming more, and help use that to decide when to maybe change hours, or to decide, hey, maybe we should do programming on this day instead of this day? How do you kind of express that and find that out?
To start answering that question, the most important thing is to have buy-in with your leadership. Like, if they're the ones that are going to make the decision, if you're going to make the decision, then it's good to have somebody express a need to use data to understand the problem and maybe like kind of explore it. So I didn't really talk about buy-in from leadership, but one reason we're increasingly successful here is because our leadership is like, yes, we can use data to do things, and it's showing us. And really, I'm not going to go there and show you the picture, but really, like, if you can get the data and visualize it in a way that's like digestible to people who are essentially, this is not their thing, if they can glance at it and kind of understand, you're going to be like light years ahead of just saying in a sentence or, you know, a table, like, look, here's our circ for 2022, and this is what it was last year. If you can show a baseline and then progress, then that's kind of where I would start. I didn't talk about baselines. I'm a big fan of baselines. Like, establish a baseline, make a change, and observe how that affected the baseline.
All right, Raymond, thank you very much for your presentation. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just interested if you ever thought about sharing that data like in an open data repository. Because what really strikes me by surprise since I come here is how you use your data really to make business decisions, and is completely unthinkable in Germany because of our GDPR and privacy laws and so on and so forth. And I would be really interested if we maybe in the community or koha-US could make a coordinated effort to bring this data to open data repositories, because I also see an opportunity for machine learning. And with the data sets that we have in Germany, for example, this is just impossible.
I like the machine learning idea. I want to do a lot of text analysis of stuff. But anyway, to answer your question, for our specific county, we do have, well, we have to submit certain data sets and document them into sort of like a county-wide repository, which they're open access. Anybody can get them. Do we include everything that you saw up there? No. Because we want to respect, you know, PII, things like that. But we can aggregate and then push it out. So almost everything you saw up there, this is dependent on like row level data, like many millions of rows of data, right? We're not going to give that to the county. Like, that is just probably too much. They don't need it. But for the wider thing, you know, we have like IMLS, PLS, like, they sort of do these, they collect nationally certain data elements, and that's also something I guess I got to do. Your mileage may vary because, again, everybody defines things differently. One of my beefs, like registered borrowers, what's that mean to you? It may mean something completely different to somebody else. But, you know, if you wanted some data to play with, like, check out the IMLS. I like pulled down all their data for the last, like, I don't know, 10 years, 8 years, and I dropped it in a dashboard, and then I like filtered out everybody else except our county so that we could have our own historical stuff. But then, you know, it's there to play with, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Well, if he gets to ask a question, I do. I live in Montgomery County, in Silver Spring. Before got married, and the house became too small, I actually lived in one of the equity focus zones in 20910. But first of all, you do a magnificent job in the county, which makes the astonishingly high state and county income tax I pay worthwhile. Taxes pay for civilization. But I think it would be a good use of my and other tax dollars for the Montgomery County Public Library System to consider putting in a bid for next year's koha-US conference.
As a fellow Montgomery County resident, I agree.
Okay, I think that's the end of our questions here. And again, thank you, Raymond, for everything. Great presentation.